People say kitchens are the heart of the home, but I will tell you what I have actually noticed after years of designing them. Kitchens are where people are willing to throw down the biggest chunk of their budget. I have seen kitchens cost more than a condo down payment, and when you're spending that much, mistakes can be really, really expensive. That's why in today's video, I want to walk you through the biggest kitchen design mistakes I see all the time. These are the ones that might seem small, but trust me, once you're living in day after day, they will drive you insane. Hi guys, my name is Celine. I'm a licensed interior designer living in Toronto. In this channel, I talk about design tips, layouts, product recommendations, and many more. So if you like to learn all the practical hacks about homes, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's jump to the video. Let's start with one of the most overlooked issues, which is circulation. I want you to imagine this for a moment. You're in your kitchen, someone else is unloading the dishwasher, and you're just trying to get to the fridge. If you have to turn sideways, squeeze past, or wait for them to move before you can continue, that's a sign your aisles are too tight. This happens because circulation and movement are often an afterthought, when in reality, they should be one of the first things you should consider. The way you get in and out of the kitchen matters just as much as the cabinetry or finishes. Most kitchens have multiple entry points to the dining room, the living room, sometimes even the garage or mudroom. If these entries are too narrow or placed without thought, the whole space starts to feel cramped, no matter how beautiful the design is. At minimum, a doorway should be about 32 inches wide, that's 81 centimeters, to comfortably allow someone to pass through. And then there are the aisles themselves, the space between your main work areas, like the sink, stove, and refrigerator. If it's just you working in a kitchen, you need enough room to comfortably move between these zones without feeling restricted. If there are two people, that space has to expand so both can cook, clean, and prep without constantly bumping into each other. Even walkways that are simply meant to pass through the kitchen, like path to the backyard, need to be wide enough that traffic doesn't interrupt the cook's workflow. Another big mistake I see all the time is when people don't really utilize their kitchen to its full potential. And what I mean by that is you already have the space, you have already invested in the square footage, but you're not asking it to work as hard as it could for you, if it makes sense. Kitchens are prime real estate in the home, and yet so often I walk into a project and see wasted corners, gaps above cabinets, storage that looks fine on the outside but doesn't function at all on the inside. Let's start with the most obvious one, that gap above the wall cabinet. Some people leave it open because they don't know what else to do with it, or they assume they will never use the storage way up there anyway. That is true in some cases, but here is the reality. That gap is basically a dust collector, and it's not only dust, you will also collect grease, steam, and all the stuff floating around in the air when you're cooking. What ends up happening is you get this sticky film that nobody wants to clean, and let's be honest, no one is climbing up there every week with a rag anyways. Now compare that to running your cabinets all the way up. Even if you're thinking you will never be able to reach the shelves above, that space is still incredibly valuable. It is perfect for the items you don't use every day, but don't want to get rid of either, like holiday platters or special glassware or small appliances you only drag out twice a year, maybe. By closing off that gap, you are not only gaining extra storage, you're also solving the dust and dirt issue in one move. And unless you have really beautiful crown moldings that you want to keep as a design feature, and some of them are really beautiful, most of the time extending the cabinets creates a cleaner and more intentional look. But efficiency isn't just about going higher, it's also about how the kitchen works day to day. Take lower cabinets, for example. So many kitchens still use basic shelves inside those cabinets, and it forces you to bend down, pull everything out, and dig around in the back just to find one pan. It is annoying as hell, and it is not only inconvenient, but a lot of that space ends up being wasted because it is just too hard to access. When you swap those shelves for deep drawers or pull-out trays, suddenly the same footprint feels twice as useful. You can see everything, reach everything, and you're no longer fighting with your kitchen every time you cook. Corners are always a little bit tricky. They usually become dark and awkward zones where things go to disappear. The worst thing you can do for the blind corners is actually adding only shelf instead of investing in a special mechanism. What I mean by that is, for example, I really love the look of a Lamance corner, or what some people call a Lamance unit. It's a smart cabinet mechanism designed to make the most out of those tricky blind corner spaces that usually go to waste. Instead of a regular shelf that forces you to dig around in the dark, this one has trays shaped like a bit of a kidney. They're mounted on a pivot in pull system, so when you open the door, the whole tray glides right out into your kitchen. You can easily see what's inside and reach for the things without struggling to get to the back. And of course, this isn't the only corner storage solution out there. One of the most common ones you probably heard of is the Lazy Susan, which works differently, but it is just as popular for solving the same problem. Let me tell you a little bit about something called the kitchen triangle. In a typical kitchen, you've got three main work zones: the cleaning zone, which is your sink; the storage zone, your fridge and pantry; and the cooking zone, which is your cooktop and oven. The whole idea behind the kitchen triangle is that these areas should be positioned close enough for convenience, but not so close that everything feels cramped or awkward. Now, I'm not going to bore you with too many technical details here, but the basic guideline is that each side of the triangle should measure between 4 to 9 feet, and the sum of the triangle's three sides should fall between 13 and 26 feet. Obviously, every kitchen layout is different, and sometimes this rule doesn't fit perfectly, but what's really important is holding on to the principle behind it. The cook should be able to move freely between these 3 points without obstacles getting in the way. That's the main idea. I will give you some examples of wrong kitchen layouts and tell you how to fix them. In this layout, the sink is placed way too far from the fridge. Not only that, but the island actually gets in the way, which makes the flow between the two even more awkward. Imagine carrying heavy groceries from the fridge, trying to rinse vegetables at the sink, and then moving to the stove. You'll be constantly walking around obstacles. It's not just inefficient, it makes cooking feels like a chore. Now let's look at the corrected version. It is, of course, just an example, and we can create multiple variations. By moving the sink onto the island directly across from the cooktop and keeping the fridge to the side, the triangle becomes much more balanced. Suddenly, you've got a clear, uninterrupted path between your three main work zones. This means you can unload the fridge, wash your produce, and move straight to the stove without taking extra laps around the kitchen. Now let's look at this L-shaped kitchen. See how the cooktop is stuck in that corner? That's a nightmare to work with. You are basically trapped back there while cooking, and every time you need something from the fridge or sink, you are walking halfway across the kitchen. In the better version, the cooktop has been moved to the main wall. Makes total sense, right? Now you can actually move between your sink, stove, and fridge without feeling like you're running an obstacle course. Plus, you get decent counter space on both sides of the countertop, which, trust me, you will actually use. In a small apartment kitchen, you usually end up with a straight line layout. The triangle doesn't really exist here, but the idea behind it still applies. You need clear zones and enough counter space to make the flow work. Keep at least 18 inches of counter on each side of the sink and stove, and position the fridge at one end so everything moves in a simple line. Always balanced, which means not too tight and not too far away. When it comes to kitchens, I always remind people that your cabinet material has to match the way you actually live, not just what looks good in a picture. It is tempting to fall for that beautiful finish you saw online, but if it can't handle your everyday routine, you will end up frustrated with it down the road. Take lacquer, for example. It's my favorite door material and truly beautiful if you go with a matte finish. And you can actually get any color you want, but it is also delicate. If you're the type who cooks often, has little kids running around, or you're planning to rent the place out, those doors will show wear and tear almost immediately. On the other side of the spectrum, laminates can be much more forgiving. They might not give you the exact feel you want, although, to be honest, nowadays laminates look pretty damn beautiful. In reality, they are durable and easier to replace. perfect for rental units or for people who just want something simple and low maintenance. But it's not just about the finish. Door style matters just as much. Certain materials simply don't work with every design. For example, doors with moldings or layered shaker details, they can really only be made with MDF, wood veneer, or solid wood. And because they are more labor intensive, they also come with a higher price tag. Then there is a lifestyle factor. Personally, I just cannot stand fingerprints and smudges, and honestly, I think almost everyone feels the same way. The real question to ask yourself is, how much maintenance are you actually willing to take on? Glossy finishes will highlight every single touch, while matte or texture surfaces are far more forgiving. Families with young kids usually end up thanking themselves for choosing matte. And if you still have your heart set on a glossy look, adding handles instead of going with touch open doors can save you a lot of frustration. I gave an example about the budget briefly, so it is definitely an important factor here. If you are planning to stay in your home for decades, investing in something higher quality, whether that's a wood veneer, painted finish, or a mix, might make sense. But if you know you will move in a few years or the property will eventually be a rental, you don't need to overthink it. Go with something that looks good, holds up reasonably well, and won't make you panic every time someone bumps into a door with a grocery bag. The truth is, there's no one right cabinet material. What's right for you depends on your home, your habits, and your long-term plans. All right, I think it's a good place to start with kitchen mistakes. Honestly, there are so many more I could talk about, but I will save those for future videos. If you found this helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And I will see you in the next video.